The karate champion, standing on the stage, had no clue whom he had just pointed at. Neither did the tournament organizers. The 3 judges seated behind the scoring table knew even less, and the 300 spectators filling the Sheraton Park Hotel ballroom in Washington, D.C. were just as clueless. No one knew. Only 4 individuals in that entire venue understood who the small man sitting in the 3rd row truly was. The man who had just been called out, the small one, the man they had just asked to come up and serve as a demonstration dummy. The 61 kilograms man with an unassuming appearance, looking like any regular attendee who had wandered in out of simple curiosity. No one suspected that over the next 11 minutes, the most dominant point fighter in American karate history would be humiliated in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress. His undefeated streak, his legendary kick, his reputation, 11 years of absolute dominance would begin to crumble, not because of an announced challenger, not because of a prepared rival, but because of a man he himself had randomly picked from the audience. A man he had considered small, a man he had underestimated, a man he had assumed knew nothing about combat. He had made an irreversible error. He had chosen the wrong man. It happened on the night of March 14, 1964, and this is the story that was never meant to be told. Washington, D.C. Sheraton Park Hotel. Saturday night, March 14, 1964. The Grand Ballroom had been transformed into a martial arts arena, with folding chairs arranged in concentric circles around an elevated wooden platform. It was the National Karate Championship, not the largest tournament in the United States, but certainly one of the most significant. Competitors came from 9 states, with 7 distinct styles converging in that one space: Shotokan, Goju-Ryu, Kempo, Tangsudo, Sudo Taekwondo, Wataru-Ryu. 300 people filled the hall. Judges, referees, competitors, coaches, families, everyone who mattered in the East Coast karate scene was there that night. The tournament had started at 9 in the morning, 12 uninterrupted hours of matches. The audience was exhausted, but also electrified, because the final event of the evening was about to begin. A special demonstration by the tournament's guest of honor, Victor Moore. Anyone with even the slightest interest in karate in America in 1964 knew that name. Victor Moore wasn't just a champion, he was the most feared point fighter in the country. His record wasn't merely impressive, it was inhuman. 33 consecutive tournament wins, not 33 matches, but 33 first-place finishes in complete tournaments. 11 years of competing without ever tasting defeat. His entire fighting strategy rested on a single weapon, a single technique so fast that no one in martial arts history had managed to defend against it. His side kick was executed from a completely neutral stance. No preparation, no visible hip rotation, no feints, no warning. One instant he stood still, the next, his foot was already buried in your chest and you were staring at the ceiling. Referees had timed it at under 0.3 of a second from rest to full extension. Those who had faced it all said the same thing. They never saw it coming, they only felt the impact. And then they were on the ground trying to figure out what had just happened. Some described it as being hit by a car door swung open violently, a flat, sudden, massive force, as if it materialized out of nowhere. Victor Moore stood 6 feet 3 inches, weighed 220 pounds, and that night he was about to pick the wrong man. Long arms, even longer legs. His reach advantage was so overwhelming that facing him felt like trying to box a man on the other side of a window. You couldn't get close enough to touch him, but he could touch you whenever he wanted. That night, he had a simple purpose: demonstrate his kick, remind the audience why he was invincible, maybe break some boards, maybe do some light sparring with a prearranged partner, receive applause, shake some hands, and go home. That was the plan. Victor stood on the elevated platform. His white gi was immaculate, perfectly ironed, the black belt wrapped around his waist. 3 times he held a microphone in his right hand. He had already been introduced, he had already received a standing ovation, he had already thanked the organizers, the judges, and the competitors. Now came what champions do: perform. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice filling the hall effortlessly, deep, controlled, the voice of a man who never needed to shout because his fists spoke louder than any words. Tonight I want to show you something that will change your understanding of speed and power. 300 people leaned forward in their seats. My side kick is considered the fastest technique in American martial arts. I don't say that, the record does. Pause. 33 tournaments, 33 first-place finishes, and not once, not a single time, has any opponent managed to block this kick. Respectful, well-deserved applause. Then Victor made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career, but I don't want to demonstrate it against a bag. Pause. Anyone can kick a bag. The hall fell silent. I want to show you what this kick looks like against a living body. Another pause. A real person in front of me, trying to stop it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victor scanned the room. I need a volunteer. Absolute silence. Someone who thinks they're fast. More silence. Style doesn't matter. Rank doesn't matter. He pointed toward the audience. Come up and try to block my kick. Final pause. I'll pull it before full contact. No one gets hurt. That's what he believed. Silence. No one moved. Smart fighters knew that volunteering against Victor Moore's kick was a bad idea. The proud ones did mental calculations, and the numbers weren't encouraging. 5 seconds. 10. The silence began to grow uncomfortable. Victor smiled. He was enjoying this moment. The doubt, the tension, the fear hanging in the air. Then his gaze landed on someone in the third row. A small man, young, Asian. He wore no GI, no belt, no patches, dark pants, dark shirt. He looked like a simple spectator, but there was something different about the way he watched. He wasn't watching like an audience member. He was watching like a mechanic studying an engine, analyzing, measuring, mentally dismantling every piece. Victor didn't think twice. You, the small one, third row. He pointed directly at him. Want to see America's fastest kick up close? Some laughter rippled through the hall. The small man didn't laugh. He held Victor's gaze, looked at the finger pointing at him, looked at the stage, looked at the audience, and answered with a single word, sure. He said it with the casualness of someone being asked to pass the salt. The man sitting next to him, a Filipino martial artist named Dan Inosanto, grabbed his arm. Bruce, no. Bruce Lee turned his head. He asked me. It would be rude not to respond. Dan closed his eyes. Not for Bruce, for Victor. Bruce Lee stood up and started walking toward the stage. In 1964, Bruce Lee was little more than a ghost in America. He was 23 years old. He ran a small school in Oakland, California. He taught Wing Chun. He had been invited as an observer, not a competitor. Ed Parker, sitting in the front row, felt a knot in his stomach when he saw who Victor had pointed at. Oh, no. What's wrong? That's Bruce Lee. Who's Bruce Lee? Ed Parker didn't take his eyes off the stage. He just said, Victor just made the worst mistake of his life. Face to face. Victor Moore, 6 feet 3 inches, 220 pounds of mass. Bruce Lee, 5 feet 7 inches, 135 pounds. The disparity was obscene. Victor extended his hand. Bruce shook it. During that brief contact, Victor noticed two things. The hand was incredibly strong, and the forearms felt dense, compact, like steel. He didn't think much of it. Do you practice martial arts? Victor asked. Yes. What style? Chinese martial arts. Victor nodded with a slight grimace. In that era, Kung Fu was seen as decorative, pretty for movies, useless for real combat. Victor turned to the audience. We have a brave volunteer. Bruce Lee practices Chinese martial arts. Polite applause. Nothing more. Victor leaned toward Bruce and spoke quietly. I'll hold back. Just try to react. Bruce nodded. Victor adopted his stance. Bruce remained relaxed, hands at his sides, no guard, no visible tension. Then the champion threw his kick. What happened lasted less than a second, but it changed everything. When the murmuring returned to the hall, no one could agree on what had just occurred. Victor and Bruce stood about a meter apart. Victor breathed heavily. Bruce stood motionless. No smile, no victory gesture, no celebration. Ed Parker stood up and took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is extraordinary. Pause. This is Bruce Lee, instructor of Wing Chun and creator of a system called Jeet Kune Do. Bruce stepped forward. It wasn't magic, he said calmly. It wasn't superior talent. He looked at the audience. It was physics. Pause. Most techniques have a telegraph. If you can read the telegraph, you know the technique before it happens. Another pause. In Jeet Kune Do, we eliminate the warning. He shook his head gently. We don't react. He looked at Victor. We intercept. Bruce demonstrated. Strikes with no telegraph, direct, dry, invisible. Then he turned to Victor. Attack again. Victor, his pride wounded, threw the kick with full force. Bruce stepped inside the trajectory, redirected, and placed his open hand gently on Victor's chest. This is where it would end. Total silence. Bruce continued the demonstration. First, Wing Chun centerline, how to protect and control the body's axis, how to occupy space before the opponent even realizes they've lost it. Then, sticky hands, Chi saw, constant contact, sensitivity, instant reading of intention. His forearms moved as if they had a life of their own. Then came something almost no one in the hall had ever seen before. The 1-inch punch. Bruce stepped up to Victor, placed his fist just an inch from his chest without drawing back, without loading, without telegraphing. He struck. Victor flew backward. The chair behind him collapsed under his weight. The hall exploded. Shouts, applause, people on their feet. Bruce walked over to Victor and offered him a hand, helping him up. Victor was smiling, not a mocking smile, but a smile of awe. How is that possible? Bruce replied calmly, it's not the inch. Pause, it's the body behind the inch. Bruce turned to the audience. I'm not here to dismiss karate. He shook his head. Every art has strengths, every art has limits. He looked around the hall. The question isn't which is better. Silence. The question is, are you willing to recognize what you don't know? Thunderous applause. An hour later, in the hotel parking lot, Victor approached Bruce. There was no arrogance left in his posture. I owe you an apology. Pause. I thought I was the best. He held Bruce's gaze. Tonight you showed me something real. He swallowed. Can you teach me that? Bruce shook his head gently. You don't need a new teacher. Pause. You need a new question. Victor frowned. Not, how do I win? Pause. But what don't I know? Victor extended his hand. Thank you for the lesson. Bruce shook it. Thank you for the invitation. As they walked toward the car, Dan Inosanto broke the silence. Now everyone will know who you are. Bruce looked ahead. Good. Pause. Next time, they won't have to ask. On March 14, 1964, a karate champion pointed at a small man in the third row. He didn't know he had chosen Bruce Lee. Now the whole world would know. If this story made you question everything you thought you knew about strength, talent, and limits, then this channel is for you. Subscribe now, because here we don't follow trends, we follow principles. Hit the bell, become part of this community, and never forget, the most important fight isn't against others, it's against what you still don't know about yourself. See you in the next one.